that it would. Oh, here's Adam. Good.
So, hi. Who's going to volunteer? I don't have anybody.
Oh, I thought you had Adrian Smith all lined up.
No, well, lined up, but he doesn't answer my emails yet. So,
Oh, well, good news. Dave Paul Barry has
yeah.
indicated that he's willing to participate.
Yeah.
I
Okay. I mean, I wrote back and forth with him and he said that he didn't think he would have anything to contribute, which I strongly protest against.
yes, Paul Barry's a guy behind the original Union keyboard.
That as well, you're saying.
Yes, I mean
For
that's
me,
something you'd be particularly interested in.
and
And of course, you mentioned the APL primer as something that you used when you were learning.
the manual, the Sharp APL manual, the reference manual.
Mhm.
Very
Well, that's how I learned APL.
well. I can't say that's how I learned APL, but that's how I understood APL.
Well, it
When
was how I learned it. Of course, I mean, I came as a summer student at IBM, and you know, one of the people said, "Oh, you should learn this computer language APL." I mean, my first day there, I took home the APL primer and the language manual, whatever it was, and wrote an APL routine to write change of address labels to send back to the dormitory where I was, so my mail could get forwarded. Well, of course, it was like Fortran with funny letters, but I started using APL right away.
but labels, how did you print labels?
Oh, on a 2741 terminal.
So you just stuck in label paper instead,
Yeah,
sheets of labels instead of normal paper.
yeah. I mean, that was straightforward.
What kind of paper did the terminal? The terminal didn't use infinite paper with the holes in the side, or you had special label paper that also had that?
Well, I think I may have, sort of done one sheet at a time.
Ah, so you fed the paper. Yeah, okay.
It's been a long time. I've forgotten.
Well,
I mean,
if you want, feel free to tell us all about your time at IBM and learning APL at first, because nothing else is lined up.
well, we've got Andre. I think he may have some interesting stories. And Peter, what's your last name?
Maybe he doesn't want to say.
My name is Vernigorov. I don't really, I just frequent these once in a while. I'm in Germany myself, so I don't know if that means anything.
Well, Germany sort of means something, but
yeah. I did the advent of code in APL. That's how I learned it, most of it, at least. And it's my username is PITR. I was able to get through actually all of it, all of the advent of code. But that's the extent of my experience with APL. I did the advent of code last year in J, so that was more fun. But not more fun. That was my first kind of foray into array languages.
Peter, did you publish your code, your solutions for advent of code?
Yeah, it's on the APL wiki.
Oh, it is. Okay.
So my username is PITR.
Oh, PITR. I see it here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very nice. So, yeah, I don't know. And Andre, what do you have a long history with APL as well? Oh, we can't hear you. You're not muted, but your microphone doesn't seem to be on.
It sounds like Peter is the future of APL.
Yeah.
Just
I don't know. I keep thinking about how. So day to day, I use Go at work.
Okay.
Go, Java, the whatever, the normal, the usual thing that people use nowadays. But coding that is really hard not to think about trying to do the same in APL. And some things are obviously like algorithms. It's much easier to represent something in APL, but just the web stack connecting to databases, all that stuff, I feel like will be basically the same with the same if statements and kind of. Yeah, and I think Adam a while ago, I don't remember where, but I asked you if you wanted to do, if you would be doing the like Twitch streams of you working on APL code bases, and you did
Yes.
eventually do them, and I participated at least in a few of them. I wasn't able to make them, all of them. But what I saw from them is that basically, once you start getting into the nitty gritty of, the code outside the algorithms, it ends up being, at least looking as algol as any other languages.
Yes. Yeah, I found with comparing my code, I don't write much other than APL. I write some JavaScript, so as well. And strangely enough, when I write APL, I write it in a really airy, vertical, narrow lines style, with lots of comments. And then when I write JavaScript, I write it in the super dense, very long lines, single statements that just keep chaining things onto each other. And kind of like the opposite of what people would expect from APL versus these, well, algol languages. I think it has something to do with the verbosity that's in the language inherently. Maybe there's like a golden level of density of information. And so if the language itself is more verbose, then I need to smash things together more in order to have the same algorithmic density. If the language is more powerful and expressive, then I can afford to have more empty air around. But you're right. When it comes to the nitty-gritty details, and especially when it comes to GUI programming and decision trees, if this, under these circumstances, do this, under these circumstances, you have to do that, except if this happens and so on. It all ends up being the same. You can't array program that really.
One of the people that was really active in the APL bug in the 1980s and 1990s, and he was a co-chairman for APL 91 at Stanford, Tibor Horvath. He liked what he called maximum diamondization. He wanted to get as much as possible onto the line so he could see it all at a glance.
That's what Arthur Whitney says as well. He doesn't like scrolling. Want to see all the code on a single page. And so maybe that's the same kind of thing. There's maybe a size for how much does a single unit of code do, and that needs to fit on the screen. And so if the language is verbose, I need to make it more dense. And if the language is more powerful and expressive, then I can afford to spread things out more. But my code might do the same amount of actual work. It just looks radically different. And so when people say, "Oh, I can't read the APL. It's nonsense, line noise." Well, your choice is between reading this much APL or a whole lot more in some other language, because all this stuff needs to happen.
I found myself writing, much shorter lines with more of them when I started writing functions that other people would use, because I wanted to get a lot more comments into what I wrote.
Yeah, my father had
Well, I might have to read some years later.
My father had the rule of thumb that you should be able to reconstruct your entire program based on the comments. So if you lose all the code, but you have the comments, it should be fairly easy to rewrite it.
One project that I did, which was actually used by a few other people, was for transferring APL workspaces to tape. And I started out by writing the documentation and then writing the APL.
Okay, so that's that literal programming type thing, like that you have in these computational notebooks where you write the commentary first, the human text first, then you fill in the blanks with code so that it can compute as well. But I think isn't part of the beauty of APL and APL languages that you can use them as a human, you can use them to describe what you want, and then when you're done describing them, it actually runs as well.
Yes, executable notation.
Yeah, that's what they did, right? They described the APL, they described the IBM 360 and using APL. right? And they couldn't run the APL because it needed a 360 to run a. Sounds paradoxical, but there was no APL interpreter that could run it, and it wasn't a linear executable code, but it was good enough to describe the system.
I mean,
Which,
I had actually wondered, whether Iverson had any notion of his notation being used in, as a program, for machines.
well, he speculated that this mathematical notation could be used as a programming language somehow, right? That was a speculative work. A programming language? There should have been a question mark at the end, the APL question mark. Could it be a programming language? So isn't it interesting? So if Iverson's notation, it maps fairly well to what we know as APL. I mean, it's a modern day APL will struggle to read Iverson notation, but with some comparing things, you can figure out little by little what things mean. And there's a lot of implied information in Iverson notation that's written explicitly in modern APL. But if Iverson notation maps entirely to modern day APL and also maps entirely to APL 360, and Iverson notation is written, could completely describe the IBM 360, and APL 360 could run on an IBM 360, does that not conflict with the incompleteness theorem? Isn't that a system that's sufficiently powerful, but is still able to fully describe itself?
I have no idea. APL is a useful tool for looking at data for me. It's, I mean, I actually have had relatively little interest in the niceties of the language. I mean, I had the very good fortune of being able to hang out with the developers at Santa Teresa Laboratory, but I was on Cottle Road, if you know IBM's geography.
No.
So
Tell us about it.
I've been a user, not not a developer.
But how was it then? So, but you were a user, but you also got to hang out with those people who were developing it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're geographic propinquity. I don't know if you remember The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, which has gotten mentioned because of the death of Dwayne Hickman lately. But one of the memes on the program was this girl that was interested in him. And she would say in just about every program that, yeah, they had to end up together because of propinquity. Just being in the same neighborhood. But anyway, I mean, yeah, I mean, actually John McGrew gave a talk to APL Germany fairly recently, which you probably saw. I don't know, Andre, are you in APL Germany? Or did you get to that meeting?
And can you get your microphone to work? That's the big question.
Yeah, we don't hear you.
Is it plugged in?
Has Zoom picked the right microphone? Anyway, one of the big points that I got out of John's presentation is something that has occurred to me, that the value of APL was partly the notation, which is wonderful, but also the whole system where you had workspaces and functions, and groups of functions. That made APL awfully valuable to me, because you could pick functions out of various libraries. You could have your toolbox put together, and assemble things that to do work that you needed to do. And an awful lot of my work has been kind of ad hoc analysis. I mean, I have the workspace with all the functions I needed for, I mean, well, my last job at IBM, and that was I got fired in end of 2002 or the beginning of 2003. And my last job was as a process engineer, checking the behavior of testers, testing heads that were going to go into disk drives. And I did have some programs that ran every day and posted data, posted plots. But of course, I would look at the jobs that had problems, and it was ad hoc analysis. Everything was sort of there in a workspace where I had the tools for looking at what was going on. But I think that an awful lot of the usefulness of APL is in this, having this workspace with a bunch of functions available, as well as the language itself.
So not so much as a programming language per se, but as a toolbox at your fingertips.
Yeah.
It's a data manipulation language
Mm-hmm.
or array manipulation language.
Yeah. Of course, you can do array manipulation very efficiently because it's a great language.
Yeah.
And I mean, going back to summer of 1974, when I arrived at IBM as a summer student, the thing that I wrote home about, so to speak, was the find plot program, being able to plot data really easily and nicely.
Yeah. But again, there's tools. So then there's a good question today. Many ad hoc tools are available off the shelf, whereas APL was more of a general purpose tool. At the time when there weren't all these special case tools, is there still room for APL in today's world?
I don't know. I mean, I'm still using APL fairly often for odds and ends. I mean, I think it's ideal if you just have to analyze experimental data that you don't know what to make of. I was going to ask Adrian Smith whether there's something in his RAIN program which allows you to easily specify which plot characters are used for each point.
Well, that certainly is in Sharpplot, which is a direct descendant of his work, as far as I understand.
So you can have a, you can plot with the x-axis in the first column and the y-axis in the second column, and the third column can identify the plot character to be used.
I don't know if it's array specified like that. I think it's more object oriented. So you would say that the marker type is this type. So for every, you kind of loop over, it's a state machine. So you loop over your graphs or your individual lines, and then for each one you would say, oh, the marker type is this, and then you say, okay, go render it, and it adds it to the page, and then you take the next one and like that. But certainly it's possible to choose marker. How do I know? Because I've done it myself for graphs we needed internally, a dialog statistics.
Mhm. Oh, Harry, good morning. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. It is a good morning. Hello, world. How's everyone doing in 2022? Welcome.
So far, I guess it's turning out better than the last couple of predecessors, but
Too soon to know.
yeah, it might have things up its sleeve. So as I've been saying,
Andre, you were sort of talking about, what's the future of APL? And
well, not just the future, what's the present of APL? Is there still a use case for it now that there are so many tools, now that we have Excel and various database systems and pocket calculators in everybody's phones and instant messaging systems and so on and so on, and accounting systems? Is there still room for APL? Does it still have its niche? Has it been pushed completely out?
yeah, so I think it does have a valuable niche if you have to do ad hoc data analysis that's more than just listing a bunch of points and a simple plot. But one of the incidentally, David Selby is somebody who indicated he's willing to be a featured guest on the Campfire. And we got into an exchange about what became of APL. And of course, I made the argument that IBM didn't really sell APL. And, I mean, you see ads in technical, well, the trade journals for things like MATLAB. I think I even hear ads on the radio for MATLAB. But, APL it doesn't get advertised. And I think one of the reasons it hasn't gotten picked up in schools was actually, explained by Bill Coco. Again, you probably never met Bill Coco. This is at the Scranton conference that I remember a particular conversation where he was complaining royally that there wasn't much library available for APL in his school. That people at his school were using MATLAB because they had this, huge library of mathematical functions beyond just the basic functions in APL. And you had little application packages for analyzing systems in MATLAB and statistical packages. And I mean, APL has had great statistical packages, but they've been kind of closed up within IBM, on the IBM side of things.
Yeah, I think Curtis has identified the opportunity, let's call it the niche. But I think the real competition, it's not so much MATLAB, but there's a Wolfram online system. Okay, yeah, that's the one. Okay, which has all the characteristics of being interactive. It's got a great graphing system. It's very function rich. As are other systems like Python, for example, which I enjoy as a hardcore programming language because of the valuable libraries that have been built up and are quite easy to stumble into, okay, because they're available online, they're available through GitHub, places like that. APL hasn't become a full-scale member of the rest of the universe, like GitHub, okay? I should be able to easily search and find a statistics package for APL if it's going to survive. Hasn't grown up.
I'm
playing a bit devil's advocate. Excuse me.
Mathematica. I can think of a couple of people in the APL bug who have moved from APL to Mathematica.
Yeah, I think that's the competitor that we should do a pros and cons list.
There are several competitors, obviously. I mean, Stephen Wolfram used to come to APL conferences, and he presented there some ideas he had, and nobody really picked it up. Right? And then he went and made his own programming language, and the power of Mathematica is not its expressiveness in the language itself, right? The syntax isn't necessarily pleasant or anything.
All right.
It is the sheer amount of library code, of implemented algorithms, where at least if you can find the name for the darn thing, then you have it ready made for you. It might not even be fast,
right,
but it can compute whatever it is you want computed. At least give it enough programming power and money to send to Stephen Wolfram. So yes, there's that. Python is another example and of a competitor, because it's kind of, I suppose, easy to access for people. But again, most of all, and I think some people say that the syntax is nice. It almost looks like pseudocode, but it can run, which I guess is in some way like APL, but APL doesn't try to look like pseudo programming code. It tries to look like mathematical code, right? And then it can also run. And Python comes to this enormous world of libraries, and that's really what does it. And it has
and it's open source, so it's embeddable in real-time gadgets and things like that.
And it works well, really well as a glue language. Right? You use Python to glue together various components. A scripting language quickly get up and running. If you try to do any hardcode computations in core Python, you end up with massive disadvantages. It'll run really slow. But then there are libraries written in C or Fortran that you can call out to do the work for you. So there again, APL could have been something if, as you say, if it had been sold more, if IBM had put some work into some libraries. It's funny, IBM did have libraries, but they were free.
Libraries, yeah. I mean, they were inside IBM, but I mean, there's a little while that it's called GraphStat, I think, within IBM, and I think it may have been called Stat Graphics at a point when it was actually sold by IBM for a short time. There was a guy named Peter A.W. Lewis at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate Laboratory in Monterey in our area, who pushed IBM really hard, and it did get out the door for a little while, but only a little while. And there's, back in the 1983, it's about the time of APL PC coming out. IBM had something, well, the time of the personal computer coming out, IBM had a program called Personally Developed Software, where programs that had been developed by mostly IBMers could be purchased by people.
I remember Share. You'd go with
the
9-track tape.
Yes.
Take home a tape. So there was a culture. There was a culture, but it seemed to have faded out in I don't know, 80s, 70s, something like that. Quite a while ago.
Well, I don't even know where to find the old internal IBM library anymore. Of course, I've been out of IBM since 2003. But nobody seems to know where the library, I mean, the APL development group, concentrated on APL, and there were a few workspaces that were included in the product. But the vast use of APL within IBM was using things from the internal library, which was managed outside the APL development group, and that seems to have just disappeared. I mean, I'm sure there's got to be a tape somewhere, sitting in a mainframe collection with the internal libraries, but I have no idea where. Oh, and Adam, I mean, I'm belly aching about IBM not selling APL. I have to speak very highly of Dialog, with Morton and Gitta, and your work, promoting APL.
I guess it's important that Dialog doesn't do anything else than APL, or very little else than APL. Whereas companies that do something else, say IP Sharp, connected the vast database of information and then got bought off by Reuters for the database, and the APL part discarded. IBM obviously doing 1,000 things, that's probably an understatement, other than the APL, and then APL just drowned to the point where after many decades of stagnation, they sell it off to a little Israeli company. Micro APL being so successful in their side business that the APL business becomes peanuts and not worth to continue. They didn't close down because they couldn't handle it. They closed down because it wasn't worth it, because they were doing other things. And so who do we have left of the traditional vendors? Well, Dialog only does APL and APL related things. Other than the core product, we also have some database and file system things that we sell, but it's all around the central thing of the APL interpreter. And there's APL 2000 or whatever their name is today, but we barely hear from them. They put out a new version every once in a while, but the new impressive features aren't so impressive. Although I've heard rumors that they're working on a new 64-bit system that supposedly overhauls everything, and it's going to take the world with a storm. Let's see what happens with that. Andre, do we hear you now? I think I heard some noises, which might be attributable to you. Try saying something. No, lips moving, no speech.
Three microphones and it doesn't.
No. You can keep speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually working.
It's working now?
It is.
Oh, perfect. I'm sorry but I didn't see that the conference, the meeting will be active, so I didn't set up all the stuff, so that's my fault. I'm sorry. I hear I hear you very well. And the first question was, when did I start with APL?
Yes, if you want to. I mean, it's
Yeah,
a free world.
In 1973, I was sent from Belgium here to Federal System Division, across the street from NASA in Houston. And there we were taking the real-time system from NASA that was running on 536075 to control refineries, Exxon refineries in different places in Canada, in Belgium, and so on. And I was assigned the path finding, that is finding a path in the refinery to send products or crude oils and anything. When my manager showed me that, I said, hey, there is a big bug there, because there could be buckle with oil going anywhere in the refinery. He said me, you are in charge. I started working on graphs with PL1, and hopefully one day, one guy there at FSD was behind me and said, hey, you will have 4 years to do that with PL1. Ask an account from APL, and that's what I made, and the week after, everything was solved. So that was my first job with APL. That was in 1973. Then after that, I made other thing. I was in IBM IEC in Laul. That was an international education center, and there everything was run on APL, including the hotel reservation, because it was also an hotel with 400 rooms that was running in APL. That's something I wrote there too.
Very nice.
Was your work in the oil industry more on the business side or in the, analyzing data from exploration, the geophone type data, which is where I think APL would have been really good. And I think the APL machine was probably directed somewhat at that type of application.
What we made there was just a control system, so process control with 360, 370, controlling different machine like Foxborough, DEC, Varian, and things like that. The research I made before that in Belgium, but that was not APL. I didn't know APL, and the person we were doing that were not using APL. And they found the oil at that time in Norway, in the North Sea, on 360 model 40. It's a pretty small machine running in PCP.
So, there weren't any tools at the time. Like, you had to write everything yourself. I mean, we can see it. I don't know if any of you are following this, that there was not even a logo for APL. That we're going to fix that now, finally.
There was the Apple.
Yes, there was the Apple, but it wasn't anything official. And I don't know exactly when that started, when that ended. I mean, my father had various items with apples on them. One of these I like APL things, with the t-shirts and
small one you can, yes.
A little badge on for the chest, those kind of things.
Oh, that was very well known at that time, there was this Apple, I like APL, and you put that on your suitcase, and I'm sure you would find other people and say, hey, you are from IBM, hey, you're from IBM. It was very common at that time.
Indeed, indeed. And so yeah, well, I wish I could figure out when did that actually start. It's an interesting thing in trying to find that logo that we can use for all of APL. Some people, including me, are worried about Apple computers, but we have to demonstrate prior art that the APL community started using an Apple before Apple computers started, and they started only in '76. So if anybody remembers that APL used apples as symbolism before '76, then but I don't know if we can.
Date, I don't know. I still have a lot of them, but the exact date it was produced, I'm not sure.
It doesn't say when they were.
But it was more probably before Apple, but I'm not sure. I remember a box of that was in the Dick Dunbar. You remember Dick Dunbar, or Dick Dunbar?
Yeah, I knew Dick Dunbar. Yeah. Haven't heard from him for a long time.
No, I mean, but he had in his office a paper with a box of oranges and one apple in the middle, and say, and the text was saying, "Dare to be yourself."
They should have said "think different." This is the slogan of
Yeah.
Apple. Yeah. But yeah, the earliest thing that I could find was the front page of the Byte magazine from '77 that
Yes.
uses
There's this one here, yeah.
yeah, it uses apples as a symbolism for APL.
Mm.
But that's the year after Apple computers started using an apple. So you have to find something from 2 years before that in order to claim prior. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Does APL still have a niche or not? I mean, maybe it's become more focused, but people should have been writing libraries. It's not too late though. A programming language can have a renaissance. APL is so ahead of its time that it's still ahead of its time, even now. But other languages are catching up. I mean, I've seen introductions to APL that say like in APL you can work on whole arrays at a time, and you can't do that in other programming languages. Well, it's not quite true anymore. Right? Other programming language can work on arrays. You might need a little bit of syntax for it. Might need to say map over them, but it's
Python is very fast on arrays and can work on it the same way as CPL. Not the syntax, but the work itself as with rank and dimensions and so on, and transpose, invert.
and now there are libraries like NumPy that allow you to
Yes, it is NumPy, yes, of course. Yeah.
to work on properly multidimensional arrays. C can work on multidimensional arrays. It might be a bit awkward to do that, but you certainly can. And there are the libraries. I've even found a JavaScript library for n-dimensional arrays. And gotta try that out, see how it works. So I don't know, maybe APL's value is indeed more of the being an inspiration for everybody else to slowly pick up things. But I don't know, there's still something about it. There's still something about the APL because we can see that. I deal with young people that have been exposed to all these modern programming languages, whether it is Go or C or C++ or Java. Those aren't really new, but Python is fairly new, and Mathematica. Go is new. And then they discover APL, and then they kind of get stuck with APL. They might still do their normal programming language as their daily thing, but APL is fun, right? There's just something about it. Maybe we can't quite put the finger on it. Is it the funny squiggles? Probably not, because a lot of people are happy with using K or J that doesn't have funny squiggles. But there's something about this paradigm, about the syntax or something that makes people come back to it.
When I went back to Purdue after my summer at IBM, they had an APL on their CDC machine where you put in a $sign and 2 characters for the APL characters. And I could actually type that faster because I hadn't got the APL keyboard completely memorized at that point.
Yeah, but reading it,
you know, the squiggles aren't, but the squiggles are beautiful. I mean, I like the APL characters.
right?
So, I mean, I certainly am not advocating getting rid of APL characters at all. I mean, I find J unintelligible, but of course I haven't really used J.
Yeah, my eyes kind of glaze over. It's hard for me to parse where each glyph, which is a couple of characters, begins and which ones ends, even though apparently it's all dots and colons. So you're supposed to be able to tell my brain, okay, whenever you see a dot or colon, it kind of attaches to the thing on the left, except when it doesn't. And it still doesn't work, but some people, I guess, can handle it. It helps a lot if you put spaces in everywhere. So I have to take a 2-pass on J. First, I have to go through it and put spaces in between so I can see each symbol by itself, and then I have to go and look up everything what it means with corresponding in the APL, and then I can understand most of it. It's mostly the same.
Well, one thing, you know, are bellyaching about the lack of libraries. One project that the British APL Association started, which I thought was wonderful, was the APL Statistics Library.
So what happened to that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's a really good question that I've mentioned it once or twice at the BAA open sessions, but you know, the topic has always been something else, and the question hasn't even been addressed.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could start writing libraries. I think that's another problem with APL with regards to libraries. It's, I mean, we've started a dialogue to publish various things on GitHub, for example. And quite often the same question comes up because you put something on GitHub as a repository. So you have a README and a license file and some instructions and so on. And maybe some QA and test cases and there's some a demonstration app of using it. And then there's the code. The code is one file with one line of code in it, right? Like writing libraries in APL seems silly when all you need is just copy paste one line of code. And in many ways, like what I've done with Apple Card is a collection of library functions. Like, but each one of them is a few characters long. And I think none or very few are more than 100 characters, and they all fit on a single line. And it seems very each one, but they have nothing to do with each other, right? So each one reasonably could have its own library, but it seems very silly to have a library to have one line of code or a single function like that. At most, a single namespace with some various functions in it. There aren't any big libraries. There's no need for that. And
But there is, I mean, for statistics, I mean, I mean, granted, you can do the get the variables for least squares curve fit with the quad divide.
yeah, no, it's
yeah,
one character.
the invert. Yeah, that's one character. But I mean, if you really want to do a regression analysis, I mean, that requires quite a bit. I mean, the APL is
Quite a bit means one line of code, right?
but no, it's a lot more than one line of code. It's, I mean, you want to know a bunch of standard deviations. You want to know the probability of, sort of the, confidence range for each of the regression coefficients. It's, the output's usually a page or so.
Really?
And
I mean, the standard deviation is a line of, I don't know how many characters.
I mean, that's a short line of APL.
Yeah.
Doing the whole analysis is a good bit
And
longer.
it might be nice to have that packaged as a single unit for statistics, and it might be nice to have a physics package with the most common physics formulas already pre-coded for you, and that would be an idea. But all of they're still going to be small comparatively speaking, right? To other languages, you're not going to spend page up and page down.
But still, I mean, it's it's not just an idiom or one line.
No, that's true. And there might be something, and it's something that we've, it's not just contemplating. We really want to write some things like this in dialogue or outsource writing some of these things. But it's hard to exactly figure out what goes into such a library and what doesn't, which things to
A good bit of
include.
the statistics things are already in the dialogue library. I mean, I'm still kind of struggling to figure out what's in dialogue and how to find.
It's because it's just everything covered on top of each other. We ship a ton of workspaces with random stuff in them.
And a great deal that may be in Adrian Smith's, RAIN.
Does it have, it has statistics like that? I'm not sure it does. But it would be, I mean, what are the various fields that we should try to have
Nowadays,
libraries
You
for?
have to do a simple regression that, includes, analysis of the range of the coefficients. I'll go to Excel.
Yeah. Or you just dump everything into Wolfram Alpha and write in English. I want the regression analysis on this. Do it for me. And it gives you that, right? Because it has human language processing. So yeah. To a large extent, the niche is disappearing, but maybe we can still do something where we write some libraries. There's all, and naming is hard. If you write a library, you have to give a name to everything. And for example, people sometimes struggle with cutting things. So you want to split on delimiters, these kind of things. But there's so many different ways of doing that. Nobody thinks that, thinks about it. Oh yeah, I want to cut on this. Yeah, but what does it exactly mean? What happens if you have a multi-character delimiter? Where do you want to cut? What are multiple consecutive delimiters? What about when they have multiple different delimiters? Split on new lines. Oh yeah, right. What's a new line? In general, 1310, only 13, only 10. You ignore one, ignore the other. Try to do both. What do you do if it says 13, 10, 13? Now what? How many new lines? 1, 2, 3. And so there, and coming up with good names for them. All of them should be named cut, right? That's great, but that's nice, it's concise. But what exactly does that mean? And the benefit of not giving names to things is avoiding this level of abstraction. Is if you have the APL code, you can see exactly what it does. And very often, of course, the APL code ends up being shorter than any reasonable name you could give it. Short cut is nice and short, but you can actually write one of the definitions of cutting in 3 characters in APL as well. So others are, it's even obviously least squares fit compared to 1 character, but so it's harder to write maybe libraries in APL. It's for a language where you need a page of code and then you give it a name that's only half a line of characters. There's a tremendous benefit in shortening down things. But substituting 20 characters of APL with 20 characters in English, you really gain so much. Making it more accessible. One of the things I was thinking about doing is go through NumPy and take all the built-ins you have in NumPy and define them in APL instead. It's going to be trivial for most of them, at least, if not all of them. But for those that are familiar with how NumPy works, they can just go and look it up and see, okay, this is how you do it in APL. But is it good to use as a library? Do we really want a function that called, I don't know, if I think there's something like this in NumPy called zeros. So you give it the shape and it gives you back an array of zeros, right? But it's just shape, reshape, 0. Right? And then it's much more general. Then you learn that, oh, shape, reshape, whatever you want. So is that useful? Or is it doing people a disservice by giving them a library function instead of teaching them how to do it themselves? You give a person a meal and you save them for hunger today, and you teach them how to fish or something, then you save them hunger forever, right? So I don't know. Time will tell.
But if you go to the other scientific library in Python, it's more difficult. You go to SymPy.
Yeah. That's for
You
sure.
have to pick the library or pay Wolfram.
And that's something that, I mean, I don't know if it can even be combined with APL, symbolic manipulation. Iverson did some forays into this himself. He wrote an operator that's supposed to compute derivatives and integrals symbolically of APL functions. Jay had these as built-in operators until recently, and then they removed them because they were under the surface. They were just implemented as J code and they weren't properly functioning. So they decided to remove them instead. That's, yeah, symbolic manipulation is interesting. I tried when I was in high school to do my high school math in APL. That didn't work. Because as soon as I hit integrals, how am I going to write this in APL? So for that purpose, maybe Iverson notation would have been better because it's just an extension of normal mathematics. I could use whatever notation I'm used to. Okay. Sometimes people ask for arrays of functions. APL is not good at that, or infinite lists. And we can't really do that easily either. You can define it as a function in terms of a function. But some things it's very nice for. A lot of the time the syntax is just very nice and people keep coming back. So it's not dead yet. Oh, look at that. It's almost an hour is up, and I thought I was only going to show up today in order to announce that hey, nothing is happening today. And look where we are. Curtis, can I say that today's meeting was with you?
Well, no, because I mean, there are things I actually would like to say. I'm actually trying to think about how I got the idiom library out IBM's doors, and I'm trying to remember the name of the guy that actually did the work. I mean, he had put together an APL idiom library, for use within IBM. It was, strictly contained within IBM, and Paul Berry called to ask Jim Brown to to deliver the idiom library to the SIG APL, or get it out. And it occurred to me that if the idiom library that was inside IBM were a technical report, that's something that could be, as long as the technical report wasn't internal use only, it could get outside IBM. And there was a guy in East Fishkill who actually, went beyond just his compilation of the idioms and put it into a TR, and even wrote a workspace for the idioms, which made it into the product.
The counterexample, Adam, to your point about the impossibility of having a large series of one-liners. So someone did it.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you can, but I've seen workspaces with the FinAPL idiom library also defined, where they gave a name to everything, but not all of the names are ideal, and some of the names are duplicates just with numbers on them. So I think I've also seen where it just goes by the FinAPL number, which is of course useless. Yeah, that's not useful when you have it inside your code. And traditional has also been difficult. Like no APL system has a good way of importing libraries and dependencies and so on. So that further makes a hindrance. Andre, what is this? It looks very futuristic, but when I look in APL
No,
wiki,
not at all, not at all. It's missing from your wiki.
it is indeed. That's exactly what I want.
APL conference. Well, Ari was in the committee at that time, I guess. Is that true, Ari?
Is that to what?
Ari Sol was in the committee of this one. That was in a university.
That was at Foothill College.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was and what IBM called an APL ITL, or Internal Technical Liaison Conference.
yes, yes.
It did get counted as the 78 conference.
Yeah, but it says here that it was unofficially, and indeed, as you say, the wiki only lists it, but it doesn't have any information about it. And so if I could at least get the table of contents,
Yes,
I could.
yes, I've the big book here. I'm showing the small one because it's lighter, but I will come with a big book.
Would it be possible for you to make a scan of the table of contents and send
Yes,
it to
yes,
me?
absolutely, yes, yes. It was
Nice.
funny. It was
Nice.
sunny also. Jim Brown was playing with the friar. I don't remember the name. It was really a very nice conference. That's where I met Jim, and when we started to test APL2 in IBM Live in Belgium.
So that's when it was brand new, experimental. That's what he said.
Yes,
It didn't
yes.
come out for another 4 years or something.
No. When I was in Santa Teresa in 1980, all of a sudden, in a year period, and to make the successor of VSAPL Release
Right.
4. Release 4 could not be used as 32 bits, and so they had to change. And Jim had all prepared and running.
Harry, were you the editor for the APL 78 proceedings? The Foothill College?
No,
proceedings?
I think I was just on the committee
Yeah,
to,
on the
to help
committee.
organize it.
So I know you were involved in organizing that.
Yeah, I was with the APL development group at the time. Yeah,
You were working on the compiler.
that's true. That was my focus. Performance.
APL compiler. I never seen one.
Yeah, in
Yeah,
1970.
there never was a hardcore compiler. It was still going to sort of metacode, but much faster, interpretable metacode.
But in 1978, there was competition to get terminals within IBM. I mean, people could not get terminals to run APL. It was so popular.
Wow. Different time.
Oh, let's see.
That was the cusp of the emergence of the PC as a serious platform, right? It was
That was a
moving
huge
kitchen
failure.
computer into, oh, this could be a real thing.
That was a huge failure and misstep well, from IBM side or from everybody APL side to not focus on that. That I think that could have become, could have been a different world today if the first PCs had shipped with APL instead of, so the first what we would consider today like a personal computer, 5100, they had APL and basic, or you could choose. And then when they made the, what was it actually called? Let's see, I have to look this up.
Yeah, but that was much later.
What?
5200. I don't remember the dates, but
At least 5 years
it wasn't 78. No, I think the seminal event that could have happened in an alternate universe was that Bill Gates was quite taken with APL.
Yeah,
That's the universe I would say, that instead of Microsoft offering just, BASIC and Fortran, I guess at the time, if he had issued APL, as was his plan, the world would have been different.
you see the IBM's portable computer, the 5100 came out in 75. Now it, yeah, and that, but things weren't standardized yet. It wasn't until the IBM 5150 that that was the one that was known as IBM PC, and the market just exploded with IBM PC compatible, 100% IBM PC compatible, and Microsoft got to write the disk operating system for it, licensed it out to IBM. You got MS-DOS, had to have prefixed with MS to be able to trademark it. Anyway, IBM's old mainframe system was also called disk operating system, and then IBM, when they branded it themselves, called it PC-DOS. And so in the 5100, you had APL and basic, maybe even APL slightly more default than basic. I'm not really sure. And then once you reach the 5150, which became the PC, and which is essentially what we're using today, then APL was gone. And if IBM had still had, and so basic became hugely popular with all the hobbyists because that's what they could get without having to pay a penny. You get the computer from somewhere or access to a computer, and it has basic, so that's what you learn to use.
Had it in ROM.
But there is another reason. In IBM, we had good labs and not good labs. The 5100 was made in a very good place by very smart people. Boca was, tell me a success of Boca, the PC, but the PC was just Intel and Microsoft.
Right.
It's not. Series 1 doesn't have, or APL, System 7, or they made in Boca. And there was some fight inside IBM at that point to know if APL was becoming a strategic product or not. And all the medium system were against APL.
Why?
System too small to run APL or something. I don't know.
Sorry about that.
Don't forget also that the 8088 was very bad for APL with the segment of 64K only. That was really bad processor for that. The 68,000 would have been perfect.
Yes, APL PC was the first product to use the math code processor. And the first APL PC, you had to have the math code processor, and the instructions in the manual for the PC were incorrect for installing the coprocessor. So there was a system switch that was set incorrectly if you followed the manual. So anyway, I want to make sure that you get David Selby as one of your guests.
I'll do my best.
He's willing to talk, and he was right in the middle of that. I mean, you had Manuel Alfonseca and the Madrid Scientific Center producing the APL PC, And then David Selby in Winchester with Ron Wilkes kind of picked up the APL PC and made APL PC version 2, which is a really nice product with quite a bit of additional coprocessors and auxiliary processors.
Auxiliary.
And then, of course, APL 2 PC first came out of Winchester with, David Selby and Ron Wilkes, and then it got passed on to the Santa Teresa Laboratory. So David Selby is right in the middle of the evolution of APL on the PC.
The first version was pretty slow because Manuel and Fonseca had a pseudo assembler and well, because he made APL 4 series 1 for other machines and it was always rejected. So he made this stuff so you could change easily. So
Yes, I mean,
I don't know Selby. I'd love to hear from him. Hear the story.
But he said he would be available in the summer. Long
Yeah.
time to wait. Okay, well, we'll wait. I don't know if I can get
Yeah,
together.
get him down on paper for a date.
Yeah, sure. It's not easy, I can tell you that to get people to show up for this. Even if I reassure them that it's all laid back, you don't have to prepare anything, you just come and speak. But it's not, not easy.
Well, there have been several telephone calls to get Paul Berry to and I hope by now, you've gotten an agreement from Paul Berry to
Paul Berry is saying that he doesn't think he has anything to contribute. I protested against that. Haven't heard back from him since.
you might
Send me Paul's email. I will personally bug him.
Oh, good, very good.
Pull him down here for the event. Okay.
Joey Tuttle to personally bug Paul Berry. And Joey, Joey said he hasn't been a featured guest on the APL Campfire, but I was looking at the list and he's been on a couple of them.
Yeah, and there's people who speak, just like your name is going on this one, for example, not as maybe a main guest, but at least as one of the people speaking.
Yes. And Joey seems to have an unending fund of stories to tell about APL and APL people. And incidentally, we were trying to get people before they die. Joey apparently had a really close brush with death this fall with a tear in one of his in his aorta. He was fortunate that was at a hospital that diagnosed the problem quickly enough to fix it.
Wow.
So we want to get Joey again.
So you're saying it's serious. I should get people.
Serious, yeah. I called up Joey because I hadn't gotten any response from your note or my note to Paul Berry, and to see if Joey had a telephone number. Joey remembers. He didn't have to look up Paul Berry's telephone number. And when I called Paul Berry on the telephone, then we made some progress. But it sounds like it still takes some work, which is, it's hard to believe. If you're talking to Paul Berry, tell him about the work that you're trying to do with the APL keyboard, because that's an area where Paul was a pioneer. I forget for sure just what the term was, but I think it was Union keyboard.
Unified keyboard.
I think Paul called it the Union keyboard.
Union keyboard. Yeah, the problem was that there was the APL keyboard, and then there was the standard NC or QWERTY keyboard, right? The standard keyboard, and the clash between the two. There wasn't any standard when APL started. It became a standard later, and then you have to adapt. That's basically what many use today. Although many APL systems do allow you to use the standard old-fashioned keyboard, but out of the box, APL2 does that. I think APL
still using that old keyboard with APL2.
Yeah, well, you can, but you can also switch to whatever you want. But what's more of a problem, and I guess we'll speak with him when eventually he's a guest, is all these national keyboards. It's hard to fit in, especially those that are not QWERTY keyboards, because then things move away from locations where they where things make sense, right? You have Z and or Z and X and C and V. They're all the shoes that fit together, and then you get as French as AZERTY keyboard, and all of a sudden, yeah, well, fine. So alpha moved up next to where omega used to be, except omega moved down, and then comes this, and then comes the enclose. So it's and then, or you give up on that and you go by keyboard location, but then you kind of have to remember two different ways, and maybe there's an entirely different way. There's a question of which key do you use as APL key. Not they're all the shifting keys are being taken. Microsoft added their own shifting key. Right? They forced everybody to add the Windows key or two.
Yeah, I find I am liking your apostrophe as a prefix to the character.
Yeah. And there are some extensions of that could be done, but I think we should just force all the computer manufacturers to add a dedicated APL key to all the keyboards, right?
All in favor, raise your hand.
Yeah. Either that, or we should start selling little external keyboards you can plug into the USB port with just one key on them, the APL key, so you can use that.
Right.
So I have some ideas for that when we speak with him. When he gets to that. That's about the keyboard, about the font. And I'm trying to get Adrian Smith to come as well. We'll see. You seem to be happy to participate, but it's also hard to arrange things. So we'll see. Anyway, we survived the entire hour without a dedicated guest. Thank you so much for keeping the conversation alive. I'll do my best for in 4 weeks time to make somebody appear. And we'll see. It's not dead yet. In the worst case, I'll switch to a mode where when there is a guest, we'll have it, and when there isn't one, then either we do like BAA and have open sessions, or like this one, or we'll take a break when there's nobody there. We'll see. We'll see how it
Did
goes.
you want to put this on dates for your diary?
I think so. I can check. It should be.
Send me what email you think. Well,
I
have an acm.org.
let's see. I intentionally didn't really.
Send it off.
Yeah, it's on the date. So like today, it says APL Campfire on the dates for your diary.
Good.
But I didn't make any big fuss about it. I didn't try to announce it anywhere because I felt like I will be misleading people because there's nobody's coming. But we'll see.
Oh, look at the BAA meetings. I mean, they're open meetings. They don't have any topic, and there's usually an interesting conversation.
Yeah, a bunch of people. Yeah. So yeah, why not? Maybe this will just be another one of those. But the theme is to speak about the good old days.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yes, it's a different emphasis.
yes. Okay, thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you for
We'll
organizing
see you
this.
around.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Your next campfire.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye.